All right, well, welcome to this Q&A. Again, want to welcome to this Q&A. Somebody asks, one second. Somebody asks, oral law, learning oral law or reading oral law, is that permissible for noahides? So it depends. If someone, let's say, is learning Chumash, they're learning Rashi. Rashi quotes the Medrash. Rashi quotes, a Gemara. Okay. So, you go through it, you're not, looking at it, let's say, in depth. That should be fine. Learning oral law in general, if it's something that would apply to noahides. Yeah, if it's something that would apply to noahides, then yeah, then that wouldn't be a problem. Looking at it in depth, like a Jew would be, that would be an issue, right? That would definitely, be an issue. But many things the person's going to read is going to be quoting, oral law. Let's say person is learning Musa. You learn path of the just, the way of the righteous. A lot of times, the quote sources, the quote, Pirkei Avos, ethics of our fathers, the quote of Gemara, my quote of Medrash, right? So again, learning it in depth, I would say no, it's more of a problem. The fact that, looking at it, you hear about it, okay. Yeah, more than that, I would say there's a definite, limitation. Again, it depends for what. If, you're reading something, it's got a lot of quotes. Again, it's not, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a problem per se. The only problem would be to go through the source. If, you understood the source or whatever, going through it in depth, that would be more of a problem. But, reading through it wouldn't be a problem, right? Shouldn't be, it shouldn't be a problem because this comes up all the time. And I remember, whenever I had this question, that, for non-Jews, how in depth are you supposed to go? But what, what do you do when they're going to come across sources? They're going to come across the Medrash. They're going to come across the Gemara. They're going to come across, anything in oral law, right? It's very common, right? It's a very common thing that, they'll come across it. So, reading through it, yeah, that's not, I wouldn't say it's a problem. Dissecting it, learning in depth might be a bigger problem. Yeah. If it's something universal. Now, I heard someone say, I don't know if it's true because I didn't see it in print, but supposedly one of the Torah giants of the generation said that, there could be certain places or certain parts of the Gemara no one you could learn, that have to do with their laws. The damages, things that are, let's say universal. Now, again, even if they're going to learn it, even if we say it would be permissible, they're not learning it like a Jew. They're not, looking up all the other sources and learning it in depth. Whatever they get out of it, obviously, they want to get the right explanation. But, this, one of the Torah giants of the generation supposedly said this. I didn't see it in writing, right? So, I don't see it in writing, or, I don't know the source of it, so I'm not going to quote it. But if it's true, I mean, again, if the person said it, then, it makes sense, according, in theory, it makes sense because it applies to them, right? Let's say this thing applies to non-Jews, very good. So, they can look at it, they can read it. Learning in depth again would be a different issue. But, in and of itself, it should be okay. I can tell you probably people would say no. Guaranteed rabbinic authorities would say no. Even if, there are laws that apply to them. And the reason, is that, they're not, a person in general, they don't have someone teach them, Gemara, whatever, they're not going to know how to learn it. Doesn't matter if it's in their own language. Doesn't matter if they understand the language, right? You need someone to teach you the intricacies of how to learn it, right? That's how it's taught, right? It's taught from, rabbi to student. That's how, it's how it's taught as, and it's a different language, right? It's totally different language. I mean, Aramaic is similar to Hebrew, right? In many ways. So you'll say, well, it doesn't matter if I don't know the language. I have a translation. Okay. Right? Let's say, Art Scroll translation, very good. Before that, it was Sonsino. Sonsino was a bad translation. People said the Aramaic was easy to go through. I know somebody that has like a whole volume, a whole set, of Talmud from Sonsino. It's like incomprehensible. I mean, the translation is very bad. So you say, I'll learn Art Scroll. I got some footnotes there, goes through some of the commentaries there. Okay, again, it's not the same. Not the same as someone taking you through it. Right? So if it's something that would apply to them, good. Yeah. So looking at it, I would say it's less of a problem. Looking at it in depth is more a problem. But again, even looking at it, I see this all the time. People quote things, but they don't really know what it means. Yeah. I'm not even going to say they have a clue what it means. I mean, some more, some less. I just saw something earlier. Someone's a noahide, talking about, learning Kabbalah. It's like, I've had the Zohar for a long time, been on my shelf, and first thing I saw, very hard to go through. Yeah, it should stay on your shelf. I mean, I don't even know why it's on your shelf. It shouldn't even be there. Yeah, I don't care what, translated your own language. Yeah, it's not something a non-Jew should pick up. It's not something a Jew should pick up unless they're holding somewhere in the world, unless they've gone through a lot of Torah. Right? This question comes up all the time. Yeah, it's more esoteric, it's more deep. And right, the person says, I'm not going to learn it for the Kabbalistic aspect of it per se. The deep thing. I don't understand what it is. Like maybe learning it like a medrash. Something like that. Okay, so you take it down a lot of levels. Very good, but it's still very, very hard to go through. Very, very hard to go through. Language, I mean, is an Aramaic, but it's very difficult Aramaic, in general. So I mean, the person was right. It's like, look at it and look at this thing and can't make heads or tails of it. Yeah, it makes sense because you don't have the knowledge. If you can't, as we always say, you can't, in order to run, you need to know how to walk or crawl. In order to study higher mathematics, right? You want to study calculus, you can't do it without algebra, trigonometry. There's no point. I mean, yeah, if you say don't learn it, and it's forbidden to learn, everyone wants to learn it. Right. So yeah, I get it, but a person's not gonna, get very much out of it. Even, some people say, well, what if it's very, very, very watered down? Okay, but still. I know people, some people out there teach Hasidus, Tanya, whatever. It's very deep in Hasidus and Kabbalah. Wouldn't be the first thing I would teach somebody. Even, especially a non-Jew. They go to Chabad, everyone learns Tanya. Yeah, everybody learns. Jews, non-Jews, why not? Get it out there. Let people understand it. Let people know it. It's a very, very deep book. People take me to task and, said, you recommend the book Derech Hashem. You're right. You're right. No Lord in the Kabbalistic aspect. No question. But there are basic things people have to know. How the world works. The evil inclination. What's the purpose of the nations? Suffering. Why do people suffer? How do spiritual forces work? I mean, basic things. These are basic, basic ideas. Aren't they more complex? Yes. Don't people want to learn a lot about demons and this? Yes. But they go into depth. Well, a lot of this obviously according to Kabbalah, but okay. So I'll tell people you read it once, very quickly. It's a hard Hebrew to go through, more philosophical Hebrew. Even translation, in English, not so easy to go through. But I tell people you want to go through it. I think it's a good book to go through. You read it once very quickly, and then just sit on it. And take it step by step. I give class on this twice. in two different places. I gave class on this. Whatever. I think it's good for people to know. Basic ideas. I think people should know, Jews and non-Jews. Right? But other things like, if a person's already steeped in Hasidus or Kabbalah, fine. If you've gone through other things and you have a good understanding of other things, okay, then you learn Tanya. Tanya is not the first thing I would teach people. Not at all. I want to go through Jewish philosophy. Musar, you go through paths of the just, you go through the ways of the righteous, you go through the gates of repentance. The Ramchal's got a book, Das Tfunis, also very deep, or go through the Kuzari. I mean, again, these are not so easy books to go through either. There are a lot. There are definitely a lot of things I would go through before I'd even touch them. And basically, you have to have some idea of Hasidus in general before even touching that book. But Chabad feels it's a good thing that everyone should learn. So even if they water it down a lot, okay. I still wouldn't recommend it. Right? I definitely wouldn't recommend it. Is Kabbalah written? Yeah, definitely written. Right? It's called Zohar. It's written. Someone told me they have a translation of it in English. I don't know, 3 volumes, 4 volumes, right? Whatever it is, but definitely. I mean, all the books are written. They're all. I mean, the question is if we have them, but yeah, the Zohar, which is Kabbalah, we definitely have. All these other books we definitely have. Some things have been lost over the years, but this main thing, it's not passed down orally. This is something that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, as it's attributed to him, gave over the day he died. And one of the most famous commentaries is the Arizal, Rabbi Gloria, 1500, 1600, right? And you got the Vilna Gaon and Safra Tzniusa. He also wrote a major commentary on on the Zohar. But again, it's not for beginners. Right? A person gonna be holding somewhere in the world have to have a lot of knowledge, before touching it. I think it's kind of funny, and interesting. You got a lot of these what do you call it, Hollywood stars like dabble in this stuff and whatever. Okay, Madonna calls herself Esther. Okay, who thinks learning this and that. I mean, whatever. It's a joke. I see noahides quoted all the time. See some people like going through, talking about spiritual worlds. I can't imagine they have any idea whatsoever of what's going on. None. Right? Because you have to have basic knowledge. You can't, try and climb up a ladder. You can't jump up and climb the sixth rung first, unless you can jump high, or you want to jump high. You can't do that. You got to take it step by step. 100%, you got to take it step by step. If you try and circumvent and try and go through steps that you're not ready for, you won't be ready. You will not be ready for it, and you won't understand it. So, I would say, what's the point? Right? Well, what would be the point? It sounds very deep and fills in a lot of gaps, and there's different. It's more esoteric. Okay, other stuff is very dry. Could be, but again, what level of knowledge you're going to have? Think of the parable that I used about mathematics. Calculus, you want to study, you're not going to get anything out of it if you don't know algebra, trigonometry. You're not going to get anything out of it. You won't be able to do it, period. That's, that's really the bottom line. So, a person has the knowledge and they're holding somewhere spiritually in the world, because it could be dangerous if you're not, then, okay. But you have to have a tremendous amount of knowledge, and the more people, I hear quoted, the less impressed it is, right? The less impressive it is. And the reason is because I know where these people are holding in general. Yeah. So, I wouldn't take what they say seriously at all, because of it. Someone says, can you write the names of the books I'm talking about? Yeah. Sounds like they are Kabbalistic books. They are. I just said they are. The book is called the Zohar, right? You got the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, right? Vilna Gaon wrote. I don't know how to spell it in English. It's called Safra Tzniusa. It's Niusa. That's the Vilna Gaon's commentary on that is the Vilna Gaon's commentary on on Kabbalah. So again, if a person has knowledge, they're ready for it. It's one thing, but you're not gonna be able to learn on your own either. You need someone, this is something also. You definitely need someone to teach you, right? Right? Someone's asked, Zohar step one of oral law. No. Gemara, Mishnah is first step of oral law. Mishnah and Gemara make up what we call the Talmud. Then you got all the commentaries. You got Rashi, you got Tosfos, you got the Rambam, you got Rabbeinu Asher, the Rosh, you got the Beis Yosef, wrote the Code of Jewish Law, the Torah. You got all these commentaries afterwards, right? But oral law, as we understand it, is all these Talmudic statements that Reb Yehuda the Prince, Reb Yehuda Nasi put together, right? Organized the Mishnah, put them in orders, right? There were 6 orders. Roim all talks about agricultural laws of blessings, right? Then you got Moed, all the holidays. You got Nashim, all the laws dealing with women, mostly. You got marriage, divorce. We got about making vows. What else you got there? That's in Noshim. Then you got Nezikin. You got all the laws of damages, and then you have Kudshim and Taras. Kudshim are all about the laws of sacrifices, and Taras are the laws about purity and impurity. Right. So you got 6 orders. And Rav Yehuda Nasi organized them, and they put all together. Rav Ashi and Rav Ami later put together all these Talmudic statements and put them into tractates, right? And organized these statements. So the beginning of oral law starts with the Talmud and all the commentaries. So then someone asks, what about Kabbalah? Same thing. It's also part of oral law. Right? It's passed down. Right? Right? So we believe that it was given over the last day of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai's life, and he gave it over to his students, and brought it to the world. And then 400 or 500 years later, you got major commentary, the Arizal, Rabbi Zakoriu. You got the Vilna Gaon, you got the Leshem, Rev Eliashiv's grandfather, blessed memory. Yeah, wrote major commentaries on it. I mean, whatever. A lot of people wrote major commentaries on it, but it's also part of oral law, right? But again, the base is all these Talmudic statements that make up the Talmud. Again, you got the Gemara, that's commentary on the Mishnah commentary on the Torah, right? And then you get all the commentaries after that. So it's all part of oral law, right? Rashi, the Rambam, the Ritva, the Rosh, the Rajba, all these are, earlier commentators, right? 1100s, 1200s. You got the Ramban. Don't want to forget the Ramban, right? You got the Ramban, then you got later commentaries, and then you got more modern commentaries. The last generation, last 200-300 years. As well. That's all inclusive in oral law, right? It's all inclusive, right? So Kabbalah is part of that. Kabbalah, is definitely a part of it. Someone asked, Mishnah is fine to a degree, but on Kabbalah for a noahide. Again, I wouldn't look at Mishnah either. That doesn't apply. Most of the things in the Mishnah don't apply to non-Jews, right? There are things that would, okay. But again, let's make very clear. Those things that would apply, technically, could a non-Jew read it? Yeah, and learn it, relatively superficially. They could. Not saying they can. But going to the Gemara would be a problem because that's all the give and take, right? It's all the back and forth. But again, even if it's something that applied to them, again, there'll be plenty of opposition to this, right? There will be plenty of opposition to say they shouldn't even do that, right? I'm just throwing out there that if it's something that applies to them, to their laws. So really, they could learn it, right? They could look at it, but again, any of these things a person's going to need to be taught, you look at it at face value, you could say it over. One of my rabbis, the blessed memory, two priests, when he was much younger, so they were a teenager, teenager was older. And, they confronted, they want to learn like a certain tractate. So like they memorized it. These priests memorized it. Abai said this and Rava said that and blah, 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 back and forth. They knew it like, they can repeat it verbatim. But he said, but he told me, even though they could repeat it verbatim, they didn't understand a single word. Right? Just because they understood what it said. Yeah. Even in the language they understood it. It was English, so they understood it. Okay. So they started asking them very simple questions. One says like this, one says like that. Okay. So what are they arguing about? Why don't they agree? Right? Why don't they agree? What's behind what they say? Would this apply? Would that apply? Would something else apply? That's how you analyze a text. You dissect it. They didn't dissect it. They just repeated it like a bunch of parrots. Yeah, very good. So anybody can repeat it. Get a dog to repeat it. I mean, train a dog, I guess. Whatever. But they repeated it like a bunch of parrots. But they didn't understand anything. Right? So you can have it in your own language, very good. But it sounds like, if you try to explain it, right? See, that's the whole thing. If you want to explain something and you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, that means you don't understand it. So he started asking him basic questions. Basic questions. Does this apply to this? Would they agree in this case? Would they agree in that case? Obviously, he had a lot more knowledge. So he knew what the arguments were. Okay, these guys did it. They just repeated the words. Anybody can repeat the words. Okay. That mean you have an understanding? Doesn't mean anything. Right? So again, we're not saying over here it's a question of brain power. A person can be brilliant. Person can be brilliant, but doesn't mean they know what's going on. The example I'll give is, again, in the book of Leviticus chapter 19, I'll get there one day, I don't know, maybe on about, 88, we'll see. We'll see how long it takes me to get there. But it says over there again, a Jew has an obligation to rebuke his fellow Jew. But you got to make sure, if you give rebuke, that you shouldn't bear sin. So someone tells me, a non-Jew, tells me, okay, every time I see a Jew do something wrong, this is for a Jew, doesn't apply to a non-Jew. If a Jew sees someone else, another Jew doing something wrong, you have an absolute Torah obligation to rebuke them. I said, every case? He said, every case. He says, you have an obligation to rebuke them. I said, okay, what does the end of the verse mean? It says, so you won't bear the sin. Yeah? So what does that mean? So he looks at me and goes, okay, what does it mean? He said, it means that if you rebuke someone, and let's say you embarrass them by rebuking them, then who says you're allowed to rebuke them? Because you now bear the sin. You rebuke them in a way you made them feel bad. You might, you can say anytime someone gives a rebuke, maybe the other person will feel bad. Okay, that could be true. But it cannot mean by definition. By definition, I'm allowed to rebuke whenever I want. Cannot mean that. Why? Because I got the end of the verse. The end of the verse says, so you don't bear a sin. So I ask, what if you don't know how to rebuke? What if you come off being a obnoxious snot? Yeah, like you got a chip on your shoulder, the other person thinks. When you're rebuking them, say, I don't care. That's their problem. No, it's not their problem. In some cases, not across the board, in some cases, if you don't know how to rebuke, you don't rebuke. In some cases. It's complicated. Like many things in Torah. It's very complicated. But even so, I gave a bunch of cases that this would not apply, or how it would apply. And this person got frustrated, and and the person said, "Why don't where'd you get that from?" So the Gemara says it. Commentaries say it. Right? What do you think? I sit in my head all day? I mean, I've been going through this stuff for years, so I have a certain level of knowledge. Wish it was better, but whatever it is. If it's not fair, I'm missing a lot of gaps. You're right. I mean, you can't ask the question. You can ask the question. Right? You're missing gaps in knowledge. Serious gaps in knowledge. Yeah? Many gaps in knowledge. Because you wouldn't have the knowledge. It's not a knock on someone. You don't have the knowledge. You haven't gone through you haven't gone through enough sources, or any sources, really. Right? So the person got all frustrated, and I said, you got to start from somewhere. So you start from scratch. That's what you got to do. But when you learn, you gain knowledge. You get building blocks. Okay, you know how much knowledge is out there? There are 39 different tractates. There are tons of information out there. Tons of information. So just understanding what the text says when you first learn how to learn, that's good. Just to understand what it says. Okay. Now, you put the words together, right? Conjugation, very good. You understand what it says. Okay, very good. That's one step. The next step is, what does it mean? What is it referring to? Then you could have a whole discussion here. Maybe Rashi says it means like this. Maybe someone I just saw something earlier. The difference of opinion on something. And there's a whole case of what is it? What was it talking about? Rashi said it's talking about one thing. So he just came along and said it's talking about something else. But then I got a contradiction somewhere else. So you got to try and make heads and tails. Who's right? And why is the other one saying like this? And why is this one saying like that? Yeah, that's what it is. But if you're reading it at face value, yeah, and you don't have the background, one of the things in learning in general, right? I would just point this out. First, I learned Chumash and Rashi, right? You learn, you're learning Torah. You see what Rashi says. Now you have to understand, Rashi knew the entire Torah. He knew all the commentaries. Yeah, I mean, he knew all the Gemaras, right? Commentaries are later, right? So he knew all the Gemaras. Very good. Knew all the Midrashim. Yeah. So why does he pick one over the other? Why does he pick one explanation over another? And other rabbis, will nitpick and say, no, can't mean this because of this or whatever. Try and answer up for him or not answer up for him. But to have fear of heaven, proper fear of heaven, if you learn Rashi, you see what his knowledge was. How all-encompassing his knowledge was. It's mind-boggling. There were actually people before Rashi came on the scene able to learn what the Gemara means. He made it very easy in many ways. Right? He's telling you what it means, okay, in a very short form. He's explaining simple explanation. Yeah. Sometimes he'll explain. Maybe I have to explain through a medrash, beginning of Genesis, he does that. Because it's very hard to, when they're talking about creation, it's very hard to explain quoting a simple explanation. Yeah, but when you see what he does and the knowledge that he has, okay, why do you say like this and not like this? Yeah. Well, that's what learning is. But, it can be frustrating if you don't have vast knowledge, so to speak. So, then you'll ask a question, or maybe ask a question, or may not be relevant, may not apply. Why not? They got sources against it to say it can't be. That's what I want to say. Well, there's no one that says it, then who says it's wrong? Right? It's a good point. But I'll make one other point. The closer we get back to Mount Sinai, previous generations were much smarter than us. The knowledge that they had was much greater than we have, even if we're more technological advanced. The Rambam wrote a book, and he wrote as part of the Mishnah Torah. He wrote chapters and chapters about sanctifying the moon. Yeah, no computers. Exactly. Where the moon was holding, and it's a quarter, it's a third, it's this and that. Right, very complicated calculations. That he made. So, you go through that, you see what he says, and how he understood it, you're going back, we're going back, 900 years. As you say, you have the technological advance that we have. You're right. But these people will be greater than us in 10, 20, 50 billion lifetimes. So normally, if you don't see any of these commentators, earlier or later, that ask the question, then most likely it's not a question. Because there's no question you're going to think of, as King Solomon says, Ein davar chadash tachas hashemesh. King Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, nothing new under the sun. We're not going to come up with a novel idea that no one's ever thought of. It could be. There are things we'll come up with because technological advances that they didn't have. So then we have to make sense out of it. Let's say, it's microwave fire and laws of Shabbos, right? Not allowed to kindle a fire on Shabbos. Very good. So what about a gas range? What about electric range? What about a microwave? They'll say, oh, you're changing the Torah. No, you're trying to figure out, is it the same or not? Rambam doesn't speak about it. The Ritva doesn't speak about it. Beit Yosef doesn't speak about it. It's 400 or 500 years ago. They didn't have it. Okay, that's a different issue. But if it's a question, if it's something, you're trying to, analyze something and you come up with this idea, usually someone else probably brought it up. Someone before you who were much greater than us probably brought it up. Most likely probably brought it up. Now, what happens? Let's say you look through all these commentaries, early commentaries, later commentaries. You don't see anyone that says anything. Yeah? So you say, well, so my opinion is just as valid. So that can't say. That is impossible. Because the Rosh says, third chapter of Sanhedrin, he says this generation, meaning even his generation, does not have the ability to argue on a previous generation unless there's someone in that generation that said the same thing. In other words, the Rosh said, I don't have a right to argue on, let's say, Rav Haigon, who was like 200 years earlier, or 300 years earlier, at the end of the Talmudic period, time of the Gaonim, unless he had someone else that was in the same generation that said the same thing. In other words, he's saying previous generations greater than us, much greater than us. So to argue in the same generation, okay. You got the Rosh, maybe disagrees with the Rambam, or the Ramban, right? Or, let's say, Rip is a little bit later, right? Whatever, within the same generation, then they can argue. Arguing on previous generations, no. Why not? Because we hold previous generations the greater. Closer you get to Mount Sinai, the greater the generation. So they're not arguing on previous generations unless, says the Rosh, I think the Rosh says it there, that he says you can only argue on a previous generation if you have someone in that generation who said the same thing. So let's say you came up with this idea, you have a question on the Ramban, right? Let's say Nachmanides. Now, you having a question on Nachmanides is like, it's a joke, right? Essentially, it's a joke. But let's say you have the Rambam, who's a contemporary, let's say. So you have a Rambam that says like you. In other words, you bring up this Rambam, and the Rambam disagrees with the Ramban, so you can disagree with the Ramban. Because you have someone of the same generation, said the same thing. But just to say, I have the ability to argue because my opinion is just as valid, that's not true. That's not even close. Not even close. Because the Gemara makes very clear. The later rabbis compared to the earlier rabbis, no comparison. The earlier rabbis, in the time of the Mishnah compared to the prophets, no comparison. The prophets compared to, Moshe Rabbeinu, no comparison. There are levels, right? There are levels over here. Previous generations, we hold are greater. Even if they don't have as much technological advance, doesn't matter. They are considered 10 times greater than we'll ever be. My Rabbi should be well. He was connected to all the Torah giants of the last generation. All the Torah giants. Yeah, he was connected to the Brisker of, results of salvation, a blessed memory. The Chazon Ish, Avram Yishai Karlit, the blessed memory. The Stipler Gaon, all the Rebbes, Rebbe Eli Lopian, Rav Dessler, anybody who's anybody in the Torah world he was connected to. Right? The Rabbi Chil Weinberg, 3-day Age, Mordechai Pogramansky, all these great people of the previous generation that he saw, that he was connected to. He talked to them and learning. Now, he's considered right now the greatest of this generation. Yeah. And he always says, and makes very clear, previous generations, I saw the previous generation. I have any idea who these people are. Yeah, I saw Rabbi Chanan Wassim and Shemikam Damo, the head of the Yeshiva Baranovich. God should avenge his blood. Stood in the Chofetz Chaim. Right, he was a kid when he saw him. Probably one of the last people to see him. So probably one of the last people alive, today that saw him. But he said, compared to these people, we're against. He said on himself. And he's got tremendous knowledge. He knows everything about everything in Torah. Torah, Zohar, oral law. He's got it all in the back of his hand. Got it all in the back of his hand. Yeah. But he 100% nullifies himself to the previous generations. He saw them. He spoke to them in learning at a different level of knowledge. Different level of knowledge. That's the previous generation. So now you talk about going back a couple hundred years. Rabbi Akiva Eiger, Baruch Ber, rather more than 100 years ago. Yeah, let's say. Less than 100 years ago. Custom Sofer. Then you have like the Torah, the Beis Yosef. I mean, you're talking people we don't have a clue who they are. We have the writings, and you see the brilliance in their writings. But today compared to them, it's not even close. It's not just he's showing excessive humility. The Vilna Gaon himself was studying Kabbalah as a kid, like 10 years old. Can't imagine who the Vilna Gaon was. Because how could he learn Kabbalah at that age? It was fitting to do it. He would have been a Torah giant even if he lived the time of Rashi. That's how great he was. Yeah, he thought Vilna Gaon was like 280 years ago. Almost 300 years ago. So you can't imagine who he was. Yeah. Give an example of Chaim of Volozhin, a student, famous student of the Vilna Gaon. Right? The whole yeshiva system today is based on Rav Chaim of Volozhin. So he had a brother. Also a genius. So he said, what's the difference between your brother and the Vilna Gaon? So he said, I'll tell you. He said, my brother, if you go through the Talmud, starting from Tractate Brachot, read all about blessings, he said he can rattle it off verbatim. He said the Vilna Gaon can say it backwards. He can say the whole thing backwards. I mean, the Vilna Gaon had a different level of knowledge. If you wanted to, someone said, just learn this tractate, whatever, it would ask him basic questions like, okay, what's this argument about? What's that argument about? He would ask him, how many different times does Rava or Abaye appear in the Gemara? In that tractate? There are like 100 pages, let's say. 70 pages, 90 pages. He goes, how many times did they appear? Is there any time they were changed or whatever? Like, that's the knowledge he had. Like, how many people could do that today? There are some people that could do that, could tell you, do a pin test, right? Take a pin, put it in the Gemara, they'll tell you where it goes on the next page, or the page after that. They'll start rattling it off. There are people who have that kind of knowledge. Yeah, but you're talking about a whole different thing. How many different changes were, to the Bach, let's say, in this tractate, how many different changes did he make? Like, he added a hey, took out a vav, whatever, different things. How many different changes did he make? Like, who knows that? You go through it, you see, okay, he added something, took out something, there's a difference. There's reason why he did it. Does it change anything? Okay. right? Sometimes changes more things, less things, based on the version, that he had. Okay. You want to know how many times he did it? How many times, throughout the tractate? 15, 20, 30, 2. He had that kind of knowledge. There's a different type of knowledge. It's a different type of knowledge altogether. In other words, he didn't just memorize it. He didn't just have it in the back of his hand. He had it like he knew, it was like riding a bike. It was all there. It was all there. Mind-boggling. If anyone since had that kind of knowledge, not close. I don't think it's close. They have great knowledge, but it's a different beast. Different beast altogether. There were great people, in all generations. But again, the question is what level of knowledge they had, and comparing them to previous generations, there could be some. Bill Nagon being one. There could be some, even if they were in previous generations, they would be considered even great in that generation. It could be, right? But it's very rare. Very rare. Anyway, the point is, as the Rosh said, nobody is going to argue on a previous generation unless you have someone in that generation that disagreed. See if you want to bring a proof to what you said and you have proof from that generation, okay. But you going head on head, one-on-one with the Rambam and disagree with the Rambam, but you don't have any proof in that generation, not much of a question. Besides which probably someone else asked the question. Usually, if we're learning well, probably someone else asked the question, right? And whatever they come up with on it. I mean, you have like the Rabbi, many times disagrees with the Rambam. They try and figure out what the source of the Rambam is, where to get it from. Sometimes they'll say, it's not the Gemara. Where do you get it from? He left something out. Did this? Okay, that's all about learning. Very good. They're asking questions, trying to answer. But again, if the question is, how far away? They're trying to understand what he said. But to say outright 200 years later, no, the Rambam was wrong, based on my logic, it's not only going to be based on your logic. But you got to remember, even if you say, wow, this Gemara doesn't seem to say like that. So obviously the Rambam probably had an answer for that. He didn't just miss it. They all had like encyclopedic knowledge. Sometimes commentaries will say, well, he must have missed this. He might not have had this Gemara. He might not have had this version, right? So to speak. So that's why he didn't say it. Okay. So we had, some will say the Rambam had a different version. A little bit different version. That's why he says like he does. Because there are a lot of different versions going around. I want to know the most accurate versions. Some had like this, some had like that. So again, the question is, does it add or subtract anything? Are there any ramifications or not if there is a different version? Again, the only question of the different versions is not a totally different text per se, it's how they heard the text and how it got written down. So maybe they heard this rabbi say this, but they added something, or they took out something. You got to remember, this is passed down orally before it was written down. And then, they were in exile and running for their lives, so it could be, things got, sometimes things got messed up a little bit. But again, it doesn't necessarily change the meaning. We're going to say, oh, it's so different. It's a corrupted text. Yeah, sometimes you have that. It's rare. It's rare. But there were many times there were certain things that were added or taken out. I mean, not major things. We talk about, maybe a word was missing, a couple letters were missing, something like that. Something like that. We're not talking about like whole paragraphs and different things. But, sometimes things, could have got lost. There were great people that books got lost. They were able to retrieve a lot of it by memory. And it's mind-boggling. Anyway, they remember it by heart. So they're able to fill in gaps or write most of it out because that's how precious it was to them. So a lot of different levels, right? A lot of different levels. Yeah. So that's what I'd say about that. Let me, all right, let me see other questions here. What's wrong with noahides study Torah and people of trying to understand Hashem's words? Depends what it is. right? Depends what it is. First of all, you're not Jewish, right? Why should you be able to tap into our stuff? Right? This is a problem. Noahides doing things that don't belong to them. Right? Going too far. Right? I get it. I want to have a certain level of knowledge. Okay. I want to learn like a Jew. They'll say no. I don't want to learn like a Jew. Okay. Yeah, I want to learn what I need to do. Now ask yourself the question. Ask yourself the question. The question is, Jews and non-Jews are not the same. We are not the same. We have different obligations. Different obligations. So to understand things, why? So that's what Rabbi would do. Let me flip the script here, and I'll ask a question, right? To answer a question, why should it be the same? Let's say like that. Why should it be the same? Whenever people tell me I'm allowed to keep Shabbos and I should be able to keep Shabbos, not necessarily like a Jew, but I want to partake. Why? Because you say you have no ritual. Okay, granted, but I would say there are 3 signs that the Torah says explicitly are for Jews and not for non-Jews. Yeah, what are those 3 signs? Tefillin, phylacteries, whatever you want to call them. Shabbos, called the sign between God and the Jewish people. It says in 10 Commandments. And circumcision. Now I hear non-Jews want to be circumcised. Why? Now, if you're telling me there's a difference of opinion between doctors over the years, it's good against cancer, not good against cancer, okay. But that's what signifies makes a Jew. If that's what makes a Jew, why would non-Jews do it? Health reasons, okay. But that's what makes a Jew a Jew. These are 3 things, crucial things, differentiate Jews from non-Jews. But plenty of other things. Keeping kosher, yeah. The Torah says explicitly, we just read it. Just read it last week, then the part of Shmini. Yeah, God told us and distinguished us, Jews from non-Jews, by what we eat. So basically, he didn't take us out of Egypt so we could eat shrimp. So why would non-Jews do it? So I only want to eat clean animals. That's not the answer. That doesn't apply. It's given to Jews. Comes on the Kli Yakar, last week's parsha, and he says that, you see, non-Jews eat all kinds of things, creepy crawly things, who knows what, and it doesn't affect them. Since it doesn't affect them, why would they do it? By Jews, we believe if you eat these things, it has a negative effect. Very good. It dulls the spirit, dulls the heart. Okay, does that apply to a non-Jew? Doesn't. But I hear non-Jews tell me all the time, but I want to do it. Not for conversion. I only want to eat clean animals. For what? So you can pay extra? Instead of paying, butterball turkey for 37 cents a pound or 50 cents a pound, whatever it is, you're going to pay $20 a pound? Okay. But it doesn't affect you. Like having a placebo. Like taking a sugar cube. You want to take a sugar cube? Okay. Got no effect. Jews are different than non-Jews. The problem is, and continues to be, non-Jews want to tap into things that don't belong to them. Who says you're supposed to understand things in a deeper way? Who says? You tell me because I want to, and I want to be part of it, to a certain extent, and I want to, I want to know at a deeper level. Who says that's what you're supposed to do? We're, Jews are the chosen nation. We have a lot of obligations. Why would that be universal? Non-Jews have to keep what's universal according to the Torah. Why would that be universal? To understand it, yes. At a basic level. Now, does that mean non-Jews can't learn Jewish philosophy? They could. Does it mean they can't learn Musar? They could. Yeah, could learn at a certain deep level. Okay. But in general, it shouldn't be done. Should not be done. Because they don't have to do it. You say, well, obligation? No. It shouldn't be done. So non-Jew can't study Kabbalah? For sure not. If you don't learn Torah and you can't read Hebrew, why would you be allowed to study Kabbalah? Why in the world? It doesn't make any sense to me. No, it doesn't make any sense at all. I want to learn more esoteric things. So become a Jew. You don't want to become a Jew? Kabbalah's off limits. And it'll be off limits to anyone who can't learn, has never learned. If you tell me I went through all, 39 tractates, I learned it in depth, tremendously in depth. I know like the back of my hand, I'm holding somewhere spiritually in the world, we'll have a discussion. We'll have a discussion. But nobody in their right mind, Jew, especially non-Jew, should be touching this stuff if you can't read the aleph base. I think that's pretty simple. It has nothing to do with IQ. You don't have the knowledge. You don't have the basic knowledge. So if you don't have the basic knowledge, why do it? You're not going to get anything out of it anyway. There's no point. There's 0 point over here. You want to become a Jew. You don't want to learn. You want to study everything. Beautiful. But if you don't read the aleph base, if you can barely read the aleph base, what's it going to do? You're not going to understand it anyway. Right? It's not going to make sense anyway. Think about a child who wants to run, and they can't even walk. If they can't walk, how are they going to run? Tell us, go ahead, run. Right? Tell this child that's barely crawling, go ahead, get up and run. Come on. Let's see you run. Do the 50-yard dash. Let's go. Go, let's move. Come on, John. First of all, they're not going to understand what you're saying them anyway. But you say, come on, let's move. Let's go. Child's going to look at you. They can't even walk. If they can't walk, can they run? No. If they can crawl, can they walk? At some point, they'll be able to walk. Very good. But if they're just starting to crawl, they ain't running. It's the same thing. Same exact thing. It doesn't apply. Right? It does, even if I would say it would apply, let's say I'd be generous. I'd be generous and say, okay, you can tap into this. Are you ready for it? You have the knowledge. You have the background. You're holding someone in the world spiritually because it could kill you potentially. Yeah. See, if you tell me that, it's a different discussion. But I don't believe it's in the discussion. I believe any of these people are in the discussion. And I see it all the time. I just laugh. I don't even bother wasting my time commenting. Because people talk out of their elbow. And they wouldn't be able to repeat it and know what it means. Because they don't have basic knowledge. That's the bottom line. Can a noahide pray for salvation of one who's passed away? Even if they were idol worshippers. Why not? They certainly could. Can they say Tehillim for their sake? Can they say Psalms? Yes. That's not a problem. But if one has guidance, they should be able to study Torah. If they have guidance. I'm talking about people who don't have any guidance. Should have made that clear. There are people that don't have any guidance learning on their own. They're not going to get anywhere. If you have guidance, okay. If the person knows what they're doing. If they know what they're doing. Is Kitzur oral law? Yes, it is. Again, someone's learning for conversions, different issue. Someone to pick it up in general. A non-Jew's not going to convert. What's the point? None of this applies to them. Let me see other questions here. 1 second. Someone says, what's first possible moment in the morning after waking up? We're allowed to say a Torah verse concerning the name of Hashem. You wake up in the morning, you say Modani, right? After you say Modani, then you could start thinking Torah. Obviously, you probably have to go to the bathroom after that, so good. So you wash your hands, you say the blessing coming out of the bathroom. After that, you want to think in Torah, you could. Right? But you have to say Modani first. If you didn't say Modani, you thought in Torah, okay. But you should say Modani first. So someone asked, Mishnah is fine to a degree, but not Kabbalah. Certainly not Kabbalah. Even Mishnah, stay away from. Most of this stuff doesn't apply. For a noahide. Some of the process of conversion, you learn it after conversion. You don't learn it before. You learn it after. The Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, a good thing for us to learn. Yes. It's everyday life. Right? That's why someone mentioned about the Kitzur. Kitzur is very good. Right? The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the abridged version of the Shulchan Aruch, goes through a lot of different things. It goes through lots of prayer, lots of blessings, lots of the holidays. That's very good to go through. A person goes through the Kitzur, you're holding, even if that's all a person went through, they'd be very good. They'd be very well off, Jewish knowledge. Knowing how to make blessings, there are other things in there also, about the holidays and prayer. Yeah. Shabbos, forgot to mention Shabbos, right? Yeah. It's very good to go through. They have, I think they do have translation. I definitely think they have translation in English. Not everything's translated. Most of it is. Some things are only transliterated, right? If it's transliterated, you better know what it means. Because I had somebody that they went to a rabbinical court. Rabbinical court asked them, things they were learning, said, they were learning about carrying from a public domain to a private domain on Shabbos. Without an Eruv, and what happens if you drop something or whatever. So I said, we went through these chapters. I said, do you have any questions? Well, we only had one question. The only thing we don't understand is the Reshuta Yachid and a Reshuta Rabbi. A Reshuta Yachid means a private domain, right? A Reshuta Rabbi means a public thoroughfare. So basically, it wasn't translated. They didn't look it up. They did it before the internet, whatever it was. They didn't look it up. So they didn't understand. They couldn't make heads or tails of it, so they didn't understand anything they read. Because that was the main thing, was talked about. So I always tell people that if I ever quote something, in Hebrew, I'm going to tell you what it means straight away. No guessing. Absolutely no guessing. Because it's a problem. Here they read these chapters, and they don't understand anything. Right? So I will spoon feed people as much as possible so they get clarity. They absolutely have clarity. And again, and the Kitzur is very good. The English translation is very good. Some things are not necessarily translated, right? Some things are only transliterated. So it doesn't give you the definition of what it is. So here you got Rabbi Dr. Google, you look it up, right? You should look it up because otherwise you might not, understand what's going on. Someone who says parenting is great for children, right? That is true. I think wants to learn more details of the Torah. What should he read as noahides? What should he read? Good question. Again, a lot of times people say, if I have a Art Scroll Torah, it's got a commentary, and Rashi, whatever, sometimes it's hard to go through, yeah? So I'd say the Living Torah is good. I mean, by Rabbi Kaplan, it fills in a lot of gaps. Fills in a lot of gaps. There's a book called The Medrash Says that fills in a lot of gaps in Midrashim, right? Just like a little more background, what's going on. I don't know. I'd have to think, because if you don't look, the problem is if you don't look at any commentary, then you're not going to understand anything, right? It's not going to be clear, right? But most people, if they buy a Chumash, right, 5 books of Moses, book of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, right? If they're going to buy it with Rashi, it's the Rashi commentary, right? And there'll be commentary on Rashi. Yeah. So most people are probably going to buy that. I didn't say you should. I'm just saying probably most people want to get a little more information. They'll buy something like that. Okay. Right now, a lot of things Rashi says going to be hard to go through. And, that's true. So how much should you really break your head trying to understand it? I would say, think about it. Think about what he says. See what, if they bring down any other commentators, whatever, they move on. Right? That's what I would say. Specific books that I have to think about. That I have to think about. A lot of Jewish people say the Siddur, the prayer book, but they don't understand what they're saying. Okay. Yeah. How does that fit with what I'm saying? Because prayer book, Jews got an obligation, men, have an obligation to pray 3 times a day. Women have an obligation to pray at least once a day or twice a day. Yeah. Now, just saying the words without understanding, again, you get credit for prayer. You for sure get credit. You might get a C minus, but you get credit for saying it. Right? You definitely get credit for saying it. And I think it's a good thing, but prayer is something that always takes preparation. Always, it takes work. It's something that you have to always work on. So it's not easy. But at a basic level, my Rabbi told me once, I asked him about Shemona Esrei, silent meditation. I said, what should my intention be when I say it? And he said, meaning of the words. And I said, and he goes, for you, that's enough. I said, okay. He didn't say, look at this commentary, look at this, look at that. He said, just understand what you're saying. So you're right. There are a lot of Jews out there say it very quickly, say the prayers very quickly, a mile a minute. They probably don't understand half of it. Okay. I agree. Let's say I agree. Okay. I'm not saying it's good. It's not a good thing. What should they do? Never pray? What's the option? They have to pray. So it's a good thing at least they come to pray. But how can they say the word so fast? Good question. Now you got to keep pace. People have to go to work. Whatever. But sometimes you're just saying the words, you're not there. Almost saying them by rote, which is akin to spiritual death. Okay. So what do you do? You asked me this question. What do you do? What do you do? So prayer, you have to be in tune with. Prayer, you got to take preparation. Not just understanding the words. You understand what you're doing, where it's going. So, to a basic level. To a basic level. You got an opportunity. You're saying the same thing over and over again. You shouldn't be, saying it like a 5-year-old or like a 10-year-old. There are plenty of people that do because they're out of tune with what they're supposed to be doing. That's the problem. But they have an obligation to do it anyway. So you're going to say, is it better for them to pray with a minion even if they don't understand most of the words? Yes. It's still better because of the power of prayer. Right? They have to learn about it. They have to work at it. There are a lot of things they have to do. Okay. I'm not condoning it. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I've seen some people pray a mile a minute. They're like, okay. Yeah. You got to remember one thing. As we always say, you can't worry what other people do unless it affects you in a negative way. This is something, prayer is a hard thing in general. It's a hard thing in general. I'll tell you a story. I saw people during Rosh Hashanah when you're saying all these liturgical poems and whatever. Like they were, it was like part of learning. Like part of the morning they were learning. Maybe they said some of it they didn't. It's a problem. It's definitely a problem. There are great people, working on it and teaching people, how to be more in tune with prayer. It's not an easy thing. I'm not condoning it. People have to work at it. People 100%, have to work at it. So, Talmud in general has to be understood. I'll tell you a difference though. One difference between the Talmud and Zohar. Zohar, if you read it, just you read the words. Even if you don't understand anything, yeah, it can have an effect because of the holiness of the letters. We don't say that by Talmud. If a person's learning Talmud and you read the words, you don't understand anything, then you don't get credit for it. Oral law, you don't get credit for. This is the only thing. If you didn't understand it, or Chumash, if you read the words you didn't understand, you still get credit. Yeah, because it's holier. It's definitely holier. There's no question. So in this case, if it's something that it's oral law, you don't understand, you repeat it like a parrot, you get no credit. You got, better to learn, less and understand than try and learn a lot and not understand anything. It's the same thing in prayer. If you can have, a Jew has an obligation, to say everything. But isn't it better, a person starting out, better to say fewer things with more intention than more things with less intention? Yes. It's definitely better. You got to start somewhere. But again, prayer, you're calling out something very hard. Not a fair comparison because prayer is something that always needs to be strengthened. It's not an easy thing either way, no matter what. because a person comes to prayer in the morning just feel deflated. They're just overtired, but they still have to be there. Yeah, they don't have the same intention. They don't have the same drive. This and that. They'll get credit. Let's say they'll get credit. Okay, it's worth something, sort of. Can have an effect anyway, but yeah, it's something that needs to be seriously worked on. Can't do things by rote. That's what I'd say. Someone says that if you live with a Eino Milvado mindset, it's nothing but God in the world, right? Having full bitachon, full faith, very good. Could God in return give you a harder life in order to challenge you? Sure. I mean, everyone's got tests, but you know, this will help a person. As Rabbi Kiva says, it's called Avid Rahmana V'Toiv of it. Everything that God does is for the best. Now, it's sometimes hard. I mentioned this the other day that Chofetz Chaim said nothing bad comes out of heaven. But our brains are too puny to see that. We don't fathom it. We have a hard time with this, right? Righteous people suffer. Evil people seem to have it easy, right? But the mentality of God's the one in charge, he does everything. Could they have greater challenges than other people? Could be. Doesn't necessarily have to be. It could be. It could be. Because, a person, it's been ingrained in me for so many years. Person has to live with God at all times. At all times. There's nothing I can do without God. That's the 30th thing. It says the Chovos Vavos and the gate of self-accounting. It's you and God in the world. When you take a self-accounting, it's you and God in the world. Meaning, nobody can do good or bad to you unless God wills it. Unless God wants it. So it's you and God in the world. So the Chovos Vavos says, very good, so why do I need other humans around? Why can't I just go live in a cave? What's the problem? Yeah, you need people in the world. You need people to collect the garbage, do other things, otherwise the world won't survive. Right? So, is God going to give someone more tests because they believe that? I don't know about that. And I wouldn't necessarily say that. But saying that all the time and understanding God's the one in charge, I can't do anything without you, even if I make mistakes and this and that, that should give a person tremendous amount of emunah and bitachon. The only problem is we got beaten down in life, so it's hard. But I wouldn't necessarily say you're going to be challenged more because the person says that. Not necessarily. Someone asked, what happened to the Nanach fans? Yeah, these breast livers. Yeah, that they're blasting this music. I don't have an answer. I don't know. All these people are wackos. Yeah, they have these vans. They blast this music and they dance on. They're out dancing in the middle of the street. I don't know. I don't have an answer why. People laugh at it. A lot of people laugh at it. Go around like blasting this music. I mean, why do they do it? I don't know. You have to ask them. They can say it's gonna draw me closer to God. I don't know. But even like some weird music, I don't know. I don't have an answer. I was at a wedding once, and someone married a breast liver, and I'm not here to knock them. It was just an interesting thing. Yeah, the music was different. It felt like almost. I mean, it's gonna be just part of the theme of the wedding, also. Yeah, but they had they've ever been in like a discotheque. They have these, they have this ball that's like, got all this light coming out of it, and sometimes you have smoke or whatever. I'm not saying that's distinctive, to Breslov. I've been to a few Breslov weddings, let's say. One was definitely not like that, right? I mean, they played some interesting music, but why these people do it, I don't know. They feel like that's going to help their soul. That's helping their soul because they're jumping around and singing and dancing, and it uplifts them. It uplifts them. Why they do it in the middle of the street and that type of music? Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, but a lot of people, yourself included, myself included, thinks it's weird. It's a weird thing. Yeah, yeah. I have a good answer. What do one need to do if you want to transition properly to convert Jews, and what is possible? Maximize proof that ready to convert. First of all, person has to move. That's the first thing. You have to move to a community. But person also has to feel they have the requisite. Yeah, I'm not saying you can't move until you have the requisite knowledge, right? You should move even if you don't have the requisite knowledge. But the person's only going to feel they're ready if they have the knowledge. If they have the knowledge, they know what they're doing. I'm not going to say they know everything. No one's going to expect you to know everything, right? The person's going to be expected to know how to pray, right? Know how to put on tefillin that you do right before, conversion, to know how to do that. Okay, right? How to pray. You have to read Hebrew, obviously. You have to know how to make blessings, right? They'll ask you different things about Shabbos. They want to see you have a certain level of knowledge because there's no mitzvah to convert someone if they don't have the proper knowledge. And the Gemara says clear, a person convert has all kinds of problems after conversion. The main reason is because they didn't learn what they were supposed to properly. And, so I would say it's better to take longer. I'm not saying it has to take so long, but better to take longer than shorter as long as they have the knowledge. Because if you start making all kinds of mistakes afterwards, which, you want to make all the mistakes now, not later. Doesn't mean you won't make mistakes later, but, rabbinical courts not expecting you to know everything, but they want to see you have a certain level of knowledge, right? That's why, if someone's going to tell me, they're buying me for 8 months, a year, whatever, they think they're ready to convert, they've gone through certain things, so, I'll grill them. I'll test them. I don't send out tests in general, I probably should, but to see what level of knowledge they have, if that's true. If I think, they have certain knowledge, then, the power let them convert. We'll see what the basin says. The basin's one calling the shots. Right? Yeah. So you have to, the first thing is, it's just going through the material and getting the knowledge. Right? But again, that shouldn't stop a person from moving. A person should move anyway, even if you don't have the knowledge. Doesn't matter. But once you move, you want to see it in action also. You go to people for Shabbos, festivals, see what they do, how they do things. Right? That's what I would say. What if it looks like someone's doing something wrong and you rebuke them? Ends up that they were justified and you look like an idiot. That's a problem. That is a problem. Yeah, because looks are deceiving. Yeah, before you rebuke, you got to know the facts on the ground. You have to know the facts on the ground before you rebuke. I'll give an example. Let's say you saw an Orthodox Jew in a non-kosher restaurant, he's eating non-kosher. So what's the first thing you gotta do? You're gonna run and say, "What are you doing? You're an Orthodox Jew. How can you be eating non-kosher? Whatever." And he said, "Well, you should know I have an ulcer. And when you have an ulcer, you gotta feed it. And sometimes you might have to feed something non-kosher because it's pikuach nefesh. Because otherwise you could die." Yeah. You say, "Oh, sorry about that. Have a nice day." But it looks bad, right? 100% it looks bad. So I would say you don't open up your mouth until you know. You got to know the facts. You got to know the facts before. You could look like an idiot. You're doing it, even if you're doing it for the sake of heaven, you got to be careful. You got to be careful because, it's not just looking like an idiot. You're accusing someone, you're accusing someone of something they haven't done. Right? That's bad. That is seriously bad. Yeah. You made a mistake. It can happen, but I would say before you open your mouth, you want to make sure you got the facts straight. And what happens, even if you thought you got the facts straight and you didn't, okay. Right? But you want to make sure, to the best of your ability, that you got the facts straight. Before that. Someone says there's spiritual benefits to circumcision for a Jew. Again, is there anything spiritual about circumcision for a non-Jew? No. Shouldn't be. Doesn't apply to them. If you tell me for a Jew, yes. 100%. I always think it's funny. I mean, not funny, but, you're at a bris and 8 days? Unless the kid is jaundiced or whatever, it's like, well, we want to welcome you to the covenant. We want to welcome you to the covenant. Bam. Welcome. Someone asked if a certain fellow Jew stole from you. Yeah, how should you react? Well, if you're certain, you can confront them. You definitely can confront them. If they say, I didn't, you got to bring proof, then you have an obligation to take them to base. If it's a Jew, if two Jews have to go to base, they have to go to the rabbinical court. Even if you know they're not going to go. If some of them once, they don't go. Second time, you have to summon them. Third time, rabbinical court will send them, someone to make sure that they got the message. If they didn't come the third time, then they then Beis Din can hear their case. If they think there's merit to their case, then they'll have to go to secular court. If it's a Jew and a non-Jew, yeah, let's say a person's non-Jew, a Jew stole from them. Let's say they know they stole from them. If they confront them, they don't admit it. They stole from them. Take them to court. You can definitely take them to court. You can take them to secular court. You don't have to go to Beis Din. You don't have an obligation to go to Beis Din. Is shared halacha the kids of Shulchan Aruch? Shari halacha? No, I don't think so. I mean, it's still a good book. I think Shari halacha is also a very good book. Is it the Kitzer? I don't think so. I think they hit specific things. I think they hit specific laws. I don't think it's. Is it based on the Kitzer? I'm not sure. It's a very good book to go through. I don't know if it's based on that or not. But everyone will recommend the Kitzer for sure. I mean, it's also a good book. But they speak about a lot of different things. They have books on on Shabbos, on festivals, and whatever. Right? Is it based on the Kitzer? That I don't know. Maybe it could be just based on the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Berurah. It could be it's based on one of the later commentators, Mishnah Berurah, the Chofetz Chaim. On that. So I'm not sure exactly. If it's based on the Kitzer or it's based just on the Code of Jewish Law in general. It's controversial for women to learn Gemara. Sure is. Yeah, the Gemara says it's not a good thing for them to do. Women have to know what to do, right? Most women, I'm not saying all women, most women not necessarily so analytical. They want to know the bottom line, right? Am I allowed to do this? I'm not allowed to do this. There are schools, that cater to women who want to learn Gemara. I'm not going to say not, but they're more modern. 100% they're more modern. I put them in the modern Orthodox category. Certainly not the ultra Orthodox category. I know someone that, for years been listening to class in Daf Yomi, right? You learn, 2 pages a day, finish the Talmud in 7 years, 7.5 years. Okay, so, this person's more modern. So it's a more modern type of thing. It's not an ultra Orthodox thing, but yeah. It's all, in the ultra Orthodox world, they don't, women don't learn Gemara. But yeah, is it controversial? Yeah. So when it says like that's why coach is affecting me spiritually, especially in the table of tzad, you go righteous person. That's a different issue. That's a different issue. Eating by someone who's righteous, okay, that's something else. Right? But affecting you personally, it shouldn't have an effect. Right? Eating the food itself should not have a spiritual effect on you. Even if their souls at Mount Sinai and now they have to go through conversion. Or even, let's say, they're really Jewish, but they can't prove it. Shouldn't affect it. It doesn't dull the spirit by a non-Jew like it does a Jew. That's, but, if you were by people that were very righteous and you ate by them, yeah, that can have an effect. It's not about the food. It has nothing to do with the food. It's about who the people are, what they represent. That's a different issue. Right? That's a different issue. I can tell you also, it's also by, great people and, okay, kosher food's kosher food, whatever it is. But how they speak and how they act and what they do. Yeah, that's much more. You're going to get much more out of that than the food. Even the food is, even the food tastes good. Even the food tastes good. I can tell you I spent 3 Shabbos, one year, when I was moving, and my wife and kids were in the States, spent 3 Shabbos by my Rabbi. One Shabbos was me and him by himself. Whatever. His wife was sick, being taken care of Filipino, so just me and him. So for 3 meals. And I goes, wow, I could ask him anything or whatever. It was kind of funny. He was serving me, and I'm like, come on, you're not, he's like, you want soup? I'm like, you're not serving me soup. He's like, listen, my wife might not be well, but I'm still the head of the household. So you want soup? I'm like, you are not serving me soup. Kept going back and forth. Sounds like Laurel and Hardy or whatever. And so it's fine. If you want soup, there it is. I hear one of the Torah giants gonna, it's like, I'm still the head of the household here. Like, I can serve you. I'm like, you are not serving me. Like, and it was just kind of funny, but yeah, that had a huge effect. First of all, I could ask him anything I wanted because there's no one else there, but second of all, just how he ate, what he spoke, how he sang, whatever. It's just, you know, you can't put that into words. That's, that's worth millions right there. But again, it had nothing to do with the food per se. The soup was good, by the way, but it wasn't. He certainly didn't make it. Someone here says, Ishmael, I know someone's going to say this, got part in Eretz Israel thanks to circumcision. Okay, but in general, that might be true, right? Some reason Pharaoh was sending circumcised soldiers to fight against Israel, or whatever it is. But in general shouldn't have as much an effect, or almost any effect. Even if he did it could be, those are other circumstances. Someone here mentioned that some return from kindergarten, telling intricate tales for hours. We're aghast, amazing, should have been yeshiva. Yeah, could be, very well be. Is Shari Halach? Okay, answered that. Someone asks, whenever recommended book states every Jew, does this mean necessarily a woman? Depends. Depends what book it is. Is it good for a woman to go through halacha? Yes. It's good to go through Musar, listen to classes, yes, but not everything necessarily applies. I wouldn't say everything applies. Depends what it is, right? It's gonna depend. In most cases, probably it would apply. But again, not gonna be put on the spot. Depends what it is. Are there specific books regarding these Jewish conversion matters for women? There is a book. Let's put it out there. It's called Halichos Bas Yisrael. The things that apply to women, in general. Laws that apply to women. So that's a very good book to go through. But again, when it comes to Shabbos and all these other things, they apply to women equally as men. Right? So the laws of Shabbos applies equally. Laws of festivals apply equally. Laws of kashrus apply equally. Right? If she's married, she has to go through laws of nida, family purity laws. Okay. Yeah. So, there are many things that apply equally. The question about, she has to know what to do, bottom line. She's going to run a house, her own house even, right? So she has to know how kashrus works. She has to know how Shabbos works. She has to know what to do, right? So practically speaking, yeah, so it applies just as equally. Jewish conversion for men. You know everything. Prayer, 30 principles of faith, all the holidays, Shabbos, kashrus. Women have to know the same thing. When it comes to praying, women have different obligations, right? They don't have to pray the same thing as men do every day, right? If they have limited time, so certain things they should say. Man should really say more, but it doesn't have time, or it takes them too long, then, do a shortened version, right? Let's say. But, whatever a Jew has to do, bottom line, whatever an Orthodox Jew has to do certainly applies to men, and many things apply to women. Not everything that's going to apply to women, but most things for sure apply to women as well. Someone asks, oh, okay, let's say Jew stole from them. Can you refuse to let them in your house? Sure, if you want to. If you think they're dangerous, yeah. Or they're going to steal again, why not? Who said you have to let them in your house? You don't have to let them in your house. Right? But 100% you can take them to court. If the non-Jew and the Jew, for sure take them to court. If you wanted to, you could take them to Beis Din, even if there's not a Beis Din necessarily around you, but you don't have to. Under no obligation. You can definitely take them to court. Prayer connection to Hashem, right? 100%. Right? Women should pray at least once a day, if not twice a day. They also have to have the connection to God. Right? No question. Yeah. Any other questions? Boy, guys, keep me busy. Yeah. Any other questions? Was Adam and Eve's hands the same as yours and mine? I would think so. Yes. I don't think otherwise. You got to remember, Adam certainly was formed. He didn't grow up as a child, right? Formed as an adult, right? All animals, came into being as adults, not as kids, not as, just being born. So the assumption would be if they were grown in full form, they were born in full form. Let's say a woman was different, whatever, but they should be the same. I don't see why it should be any different. People get caught up in the Iron Age and this age and that age and Cro-Magnon man and this and that. It's man was made. Man was created at the very beginning. As an adult. So, what they saw, well, they could be animals. What they claim is quote unquote Cro-Magnon man and this and that. It could very well be animals because there weren't stages in mankind. There definitely weren't stages. So my assumption would be, without knowing anything else, which I don't see why that should be an issue, and that would be that, that their hands were the same. There's no difference. Shouldn't be any difference. What to be done according to Jewish law if a husband refuses to give his wife a get, a Jewish bill of divorce? Well, you do things to try, and you can't coerce him, you can't force him. The Rambam says you could beat him to an inch of his life. Because he really wants to do the right thing, but his evil inclinations taking over, is overcoming him. So, what rabbinical courts do is they put pressure on them. They try and put pressure without coercion. They have a get law in New York that, divorce law in New York that still, a lot of people still not happy with the language because it pretty, like freezes their bank accounts, it does other things. And the bottom line is it looks like a forced get, which is the problem. Can't force it. Can't force it on them. So they do different things. They try and do different things, put pressure without actually, getting to the point where they force them. But there are people certainly, working on in the modern Orthodox community for years, probably 30 years or more, they have a prenuptial agreement. Usually a prenuptial agreement, it doesn't matter if there's any money involved or not, but basically that the husband will agree, because he signs a document, that he's going to give a bill of divorce. Now, in the other Orthodox community, they don't have one yet. They don't know, for whatever reason, they don't like the wording of it. To them, it's too much of a force. Seems like a forced thing, so to speak. So therefore, they're still working on a version to do it, but that's the way to fix it. That's one way to fix it. So they put pressure. They put all kinds of pressure on the person to give the get, but they got to be very careful because they put too much pressure, then it's like he's forced. And if he gives it, could be it's really under duress against his will. And even according to the Rambam, it shouldn't be done that way. But there are, it's a problem because, people say, well, it's not the woman's fault. She's stuck. She can't get married. Right. But again, who makes the kedusha? Who makes the kedusha? Who says, Harayat mikudeshitli? The guy. He says, you are sanctified to me because it's hard for a guy to commit. So if he makes the kedusha, if he makes the sanctification, he's got to be the one to break it. Say, well, let's change it. You got to remember. You got to remember, you're not going to change it over here. That hasn't changed over the years. The person to commit the most is the guy, not the woman. He's got all the obligation. So let her say it. But again, you're taking away from the whole purpose here. He has to be the one to commit. It's hard for a guy to commit in general. Why not? No pun intended. He's milking the cow for free. Why should she commit? All of a sudden, what's a great way to, destroy romance? Get married, says Victor Miller, right? And people who live together and they get married, 75% chance they'll get divorced. What happened? It's already 50 to 60% chance they're going to get divorced anyway. What happened if they live together? Why is it worse? Because now you get an obligation. Now it's a different thing. You get total obligation now. It's not as fun, maybe. But you can't change it. Yeah. Because it's the guy who has to make the commitment. He's the one making the commitment. I'm not saying the woman's done, but he's the one making the commitment. So he has to be the one to break it. Someone says, what does humble before others mean? In the sense of the Messiah. I don't know in the sense of the Messiah. I can tell you, though, it means that when a person is humble, they look at themselves as not that they're valueless. Not that like they're worth nothing, but they look at others as, Chosavov says in Shar Precious, the gate of extension. He says he's humble before other people, like special abstinence. Why is he humble before other people? Why does he think people? He thinks people are greater than him. People are more pure than him. Yeah, so it's not a false sense of pride per se, or a false sense of what's a better, false sense of humility. He believes that to be true. He doesn't think he's special, right? He doesn't think anything about him is special. Other people are much greater than him. And how they learn and what they do, and and other things. So over here, right? So over here, humility is all about, it's all about feeling that, that other, like, why do you think you're so special? I mean, you have to have self-esteem, you have to know your place, it's true. But, being humble shows that, you do have self-esteem, but you don't think you're anything special. Someone asks, is there any spiritual value shown in the key? Of course. I mean, it's obviously physical value, but again, a bond between, two people where they don't touch anyone else, until after marriage, right? So that bond is much stronger. You say, well, it's a physical bond, right? Love comes later, comes after marriage. That's true. That's very true. But there are a lot of spiritual things to it, because you bond much tighter even before any physicality. Yeah, physicality solidifies it. Okay, that's not the whole thing, because you have to speak. You have to speak to your spouse when when you can't be physical. When it's that time of the month, you can't be physical. Okay, so what do you do? So you have to have a more intimate level of communication without the intimacy, right? That's a huge spiritual thing. Someone asks, are we gonna get to hit prayer? Yeah, I'm not gonna do it now, but yeah, we're gonna hit it. It's definitely one of the topics. Definitely one of the class we're gonna hit, but not gonna hit the moment. But yeah, we're definitely gonna hit it. Someone says it's not certain actual length of prayers. Okay, so what is it? Shmon Esrei and say, graciously grant us wisdom. Yeah, graciously. Why? I'm going to speak about it when I speak about the Shmon Esrei, but why doesn't it say give it to me? And what type of wisdom are we talking about, by the way? We're talking about general wisdom? We're not talking about general wisdom. Wisdom, the Shmon Esrei is talking about, is spiritual wisdom. Can God give someone spiritual wisdom? You have to be ready for it. You have to want it. So he'll grant it when you're ready for it. When you want it, he'll help you. But to give it to you, I'm going to give it to you. So, but again, if I don't pray for that, does it mean I'm stupid? No. Doesn't mean a person's stupid. It means they have to, it's about spiritual knowledge. That's what it's talking about. Right? That's where that blessing ends. So there are 19 blessings altogether. First 3 and the last 3 are always the same. And during the week, you have 13 middle blessings, asking for our needs, right? Knowledge, repentance. We ask for livelihood, health, spiritual redemption. We ask for 13 things. 13 things we ask for. On Shabbos, we don't ask for any needs. Only by the Shmon Esrei. So that's the 4th paragraph, right? Then you have a paragraph after that about repentance, and then you have atonement after that. Then you have what's it called, health, and then you have livelihood, right? So whatever. There's a reason it's in that order, but I'm not going through it now. I'll speak about it when I speak about the Shemona Esrei. Does concubine still relationship exist? Nope, no concubines. Doesn't exist today. There was a decree of Rabbeinu Gershom, you can only marry one woman. That's it. Even though that decree is over now, but it doesn't matter. We only marry one woman. No concubines today. Someone told me that he's got a girlfriend and won't marry her. No, I don't. I mean, no idea what that means if he's married. Yeah, so it's forbidden. It's a forbidden relationship if he's married. Definitely forbidden relationship. Why is husband responsible for keeping shalom bayis? Who says he's only responsible? Woman also goes both ways. Yeah, I mean she represents the house. That's true, but when it comes to family harmony, who says it only relies on him? It relies on both, right? It relies on a woman just as much as it does on a man. There can be equally, as many problems with a woman as a man. It's not always the man's fault. There's shalom bayis problems. That there are family problems. Not only his fault, it could be her fault. Right? It goes both ways. So it's not only on him. Not only that, they have to educate their kids the same way. They have to be holding the same place. They should never, even if they disagree what to do in a certain situation, never argue in front of your kids. They both have to be holding the same place. Right? But it's equally on the woman as it is the man. Don't place on the man here. Right? Shalom bayis is not only on the man. Yeah, it's equally on the woman as it would be a man. Yeah, any other questions? All right, I'm gonna stop here. I do this every Tuesday and Thursday, 10 o'clock Eastern time, 5 o'clock Israel time. Anyone has any questions? I'm in Facebook at Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, OrthodoxConversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos on Q&As, ethics for fathers. Book of Leviticus, you want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBICHAIMCOFFMAN @gmail.com. Trevor, good beginning of the day, middle of the day, end of the day.